Program Chair Rita Lokey is going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Brenda. Hello, everyone. Today, I'd like to, first of all, thank Sue Yost for recommending our speaker today, Tracy Cassidy. She actually saw her present to the North Texas chapter and provided me with contact information. We tried to have Tracy, I believe, in April, and we ran into some technical problems. So I'm proud that we're able to reschedule her today. She's going to present rodenticides and the effects on owls and other mammals today. So I'll let her get into the presentation and tell you more about that. But I would like to tell you that she's been a vet technician for over 12 years, and she currently works in an emergency medicine. She's certified in small animal nursing and has cared for companion animals with a focus on cats, pocket pets, and exotics. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Tracy.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for coming this morning and allowing me to be here. I'm very happy to be here and I'm very excited. All right. Well, as Rita was so kind to say, my name is Tracy Cassidy and I'm a veterinary technician here at MedVet in North Dallas. MedVet is a specialty and animal emergency hospital. I've been working with animals about 12 years or so, and I do specialize or have a specialization in small animal nursing. So that would be your little kids, rabbits, even turtles, guinea pigs, that sort of thing. I was fortunate enough to spend time taking care of animals at River Legacy Science Center in Arlington. I live right on River Legacy, and we were talking about the trails when people were signing in. As an emergency room technician, though, I've had the unfortunate advantage many times to care for animals that have ingested rat poison. There we go. Okay, in 2019 in Pickens County, Georgia, a homeowner learned to her surprise that a black bear and her 3 cubs had denned for the winter under her backyard deck. After a few days, the homeowner observed the mother bear emerging from under the deck. The mother bear staggered, fell to the ground, and died. The cubs appeared to be unaffected, and the Georgia Department of Natural Resources quickly removed them and then placed them with the Georgia Zoo. The body of the mother was sent off for necropsy, which is what they call an autopsy in animal medicine, and of course, testing. Necropsy revealed 2 liters of non-clotted blood in her thoracic cavity, so in her chest cavity. Blood also filled her lungs and abdominal cavity, and there were numerous hemorrhages found throughout her body. Liver testing showed the presence of 2 toxins in her system. One was brodifacoum and the other was bromethalin, both of which are known as anticoagulant rodenticides. Okay. As heartbreaking as the story is, it's far from an isolated case. So just how common is rodenticide poisoning in wildlife? Every paw print that you see on this map is a place that I've been in contact with that has supplied me with information about rodenticide poisoning that they've seen. In New York City, their most famous red-tailed hawk couple was Pale Male and Lima. They made headlines when Lima was found dead in Central Park. Necropsy on her showed 3 rodenticides in her liver. There we go. In Lake Havasu, Arizona, Western burrowing animals are being found dead at the entrance to their burrows with no sign of predation. Toxicology performed by the Washington State Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab has shown all of these owls to be positive for high levels of brodifacoum. The beginning of 2020 gave all of us the sad story of Eaglet 14 or E14, and you may remember this story. E14 was one of 2 babies born to proud bald eagle parents, Harriet and M15. We watched and celebrated on the Eagle Cam when they were born, but we all grieved together when E14 succumbed to brodifacoum poisoning at the tender age of 26 days. And this was something that we unfortunately got to see on camera. So to understand this problem a little bit more in depth, we're going to go to Santa Monica. The National Park Service here has been studying mountain lions in the Santa Monica Mountains since 2002. They have over 90 mountain lions that have been humanely captured, sedated, examined, and fitted with GPS collars. Santa Monica is one of 2 large cities with big cats living within the city limits. So this affords us a unique opportunity to study these cats and study the effect of human encroachment. And just a little bit of trivia, the other city with big cats within their limits is Mumbai in Italy, and with them it's leopards. So, in March of 2019, wildlife biologists with the National Park Service received what they call a mortality signal from the GPS collar of Puma 47 or P47. A 3-year-old male who had once tied with his father for the largest mountain lion in this study. He was 150 pounds and 7 feet long from the tip of his nose to the tip of his tail. One big kitty. A team was sent out to locate him in the Santa Monica Mountains, and on March 21st, unfortunately, his remains were found. There were no visible wounds, no sign of trauma. So a necropsy was performed by the California Animal Health and Food Safety Lab. Now that's part of the University of Southern California, UC Davis. They revealed significant hemorrhaging both in his head and in his lungs. Now, toxicology testing on his liver revealed the presence of 6 different anticoagulant compounds. So P47 died from rodenticide poisoning. This picture of this beautiful kitty was taken by trail cam. And as you can see, it's dated February 14th, 2019. That was a mere 35 days prior to his death. And you wouldn't know by looking at him that he was as ill as he is. So rodenticide or rat poisoning has been in use for decades. So prior to the 1940s, most rat poison contained arsenic or strychnine. Strychnine is still available as a below-ground pest control for gophers. The 1940s and 50s saw the first wave of anticoagulants come in. They were referred to as first generation. These anticoagulants worked by disrupting the normal clotting process in the body. So several consecutive feedings were required to deliver a lethal dose. Rats are considered food shy by nature, so that means that they won't taste a new food source if they see it harming another rat. So in other words, if a rat eats the bait multiple times without being harmed, other rats will be more inclined to go and sample the bait as well. So these first generation anticoagulants are actually excreted from the body in about 1 week. An example of a first generation that you may be familiar with is warfarin. You might know the name of it. It's used in human medicine under the brand name Coumadin. But during the 1970s, we started to see some resistance to the first generation rodenticides. So the second generation rodenticides were introduced. These rodenticides are much more potent, and they deliver a lethal dose in just 1 feeding. Where the first generation anticoagulants were excreted in 1 week, these remain in the tissues longer. We're not sure exactly how long. These were once the most commonly used rodenticides in residential settings, and they are still in use by professionals. Now, an example of a second generation rodenticide, anticoagulant rodenticide, would be Rodenticide. So to understand the role of anticoagulants in the body, we have to understand the coagulation or the process of forming a blood clot. So we're going to science just a little bit this morning, but it's not going to be too scary. So when coagulation works properly, a clot is formed and it's held firmly in place at the injury site. So bleeding causes a series of steps to be set in motion in the body. So you see in the first one, a tear forms in the blood vessel and the injury begins to bleed, whether it's externally or internally. Clotting factors are then activated in the liver. The injured vessel constricts to control blood loss by limiting the blood flow through the vessel. Platelets are then activated. They stick to each other and to the vessel wall, so they bind to form like a plug. The clotting factors that proteins trigger the production of fibrin. Fibrin is a protein that forms the clot by acting like a net. to keep that platelet plug in place. So over time, the clot will strengthen, then it begins to dissolve as the vessel heals. So clotting is a series of very intense chemical events that involve vitamin K clotting factors. These are factors 2, 7, 9, and 10. As long as there's enough vitamin K in the body, these factors can be activated and blood can clot. Now, what anticoagulant rodenticides do is they interfere with the action of vitamin K, causing the clotting factors to be depleted. So rodenticide toxicosis is commonly seen in veterinary practices in both cats and dogs. The time between the ingestion of the toxin and the onset of symptoms is really dependent on the poison and the amount consumed. For second generation anticoagulants, it can take up to 5 days before clinical signs appear as the body uses up its stores of clotting factors. The clinical signs most commonly seen first are lethargy and generalized weakness, vomiting, and black tarry stools. Without medical intervention, this will progress to difficulty breathing and coughing, bruising, abdominal distension and pain, and even lameness due to bleeding into the joints. So if you remember, a few slides ago, I mentioned Puma 47, okay? So P47 and his sister P46 were born in November of 2014. At 4 weeks of age, they were both outfitted with little tiny radio collars, and that's when this photograph was taken. And obviously, mom was away from the den when it happened. In January of 2017, at approximately 14 months of age, P47 was captured, sedated, examined, and fitted with an actual GPS collar. It was noted at that exam that he appeared to be in pretty good health. So a year later, in January 28, when he was about 2 years of age, he was again captured, sedated, and examined. It was again noted that he seemed to be healthy. And it was at this exam that he tied for the largest mountain lion in the Santa Monica study. So how did this apparently healthy mountain lion wind up with 6 different anticoagulant rodenticides in his system? Well, the answer is in his diet. So what we know about mountain lions are that they are apex predators with very few natural enemies. They sit at the top of the food chain, often competing for food sources from other apex predators. Their preferred diet consists of deer, bighorn sheep, coyote, squirrel, raccoon, rabbits, and yes, even rats. Mountain lion can easily consume 9 to 10 pounds of meat daily, or the equivalent of 40 hamburgers. It's a lot of meat. Biologists with the National Park Service believe that P47 died from something called secondary poisoning. So now we're going to talk about different levels of poisoning. Primary poisoning is when an animal eats the rodenticide and is poisoned. So a rat eats the bait from the trap and dies. Secondary poisoning is when a predatory animal is poisoned after consuming the flesh of an animal that ate rodenticide. So a coyote comes, eats the rat that ate the bait from the trap. Tertiary poisoning is when a predatory animal is poisoned after consuming the flesh of an animal that is secondarily poisoned. A mountain lion eats the coyote that ate the rat that ate the bait from the trap. So these types of poisonings are most commonly seen in predators, obviously, scavengers, and raptors, because the small mammals who eat the bait comprise the diet of these much larger mammals and birds. Okay, in Massachusetts, Dr. Maureen Murray, she's a veterinarian, and she's board certified in avian medicine, or medicine that studies birds. She conducted 2 very famous studies on raptors, or birds of prey. Each study was 4 years in length, and it covered the effects of anticoagulant rodenticide on the raptors that were brought into the wildlife clinic at Tufts University. So they could be brought in by animal control, rehabbers, even referrals from veterinary clinics. So this study included those that were treated and released, treated but later died, were humanely euthanized, or were found alive but died shortly after. So as you can see from this, of the 161 birds tested, from 2006 to 2010, 139 or 86% were positive for the presence of an anticoagulant rodenticide in their liver. And the numbers are just staggering. 89% of red-tailed hawks were positive, 75% of barred owls, 87% of eastern screech owls, and 100% of great horned owls. Over the course of this study, 6% died or were humanely euthanized due to the severity of their symptoms. And you know what? It gets worse. Dr. Murray repeated this study from 2012 to 2016. This is following some federal regulation of rodenticide, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So she was curious if the regulations that were put into effect were making any sort of an impact. Are they helping wildlife? The parameters for the second study were the same as in the earlier study. In this one, 94 birds were tested in the time period. Of these, 90 or 96% were positive for the presence of an anticoagulant rodenticide in their liver. 97% of red-tailed hawks were positive, 88% of barred owls, 100% of eastern screech owls, and 100% of great horned owls. It's just heartbreaking. But was this reflective of chronic poisoning, Dr. Murray was wondering, or was it just too soon after the regulations went into effect to be adequately studying the effects of the regulation? So P67 was born in May of 2018 and was outfitted with a radio collar at about 3 weeks of age. She's over in Santa Monica. Biologists have been able to track her movements for 2 years. In July of 2020, they stumbled upon a den containing 2 3-week-old cubs, and they named them P91 and P92, and that's who you see in the photograph. That same day, the body of their mother, P67, was found not too far from the den. P67 was emaciated, but there was no apparent sign of any kind of a trauma. Necropsy showed there was absolutely no food in her stomach or GI tract, but there was significant hemorrhaging in her abdomen. The cause of death was ruled as septicemia, which is an infection of the blood, with necrotizing enteritis, which is an intestinal disease, contributing. Toxicology results identified 5 different anticoagulant rodenticides, as well as a toxin called bromethalin, which we're going to discuss in a few minutes. As far as what happened with the cubs, they were placed with another puma out in the wild named P65. She had given birth at almost the same time as P67. The biologists hoped that P65 would foster the baby so the cubs could remain in the wild. But sadly, it didn't go well, and P65 was not on board with this plan. So biologists then captured them and then placed them with the Southwest Wildlife Conservation Center in Arizona, and I assure you they're doing very well there. This problem with rodenticide is not just in the United States. I have been in contact with wildlife rehabbers and veterinarians in England, in Scotland, all over. But this is an interesting study. In 2009 in New Zealand, biologists investigated the deaths of lesser short-tailed bats. Now, these are a threatened species. What happened, the biologists found dead and dying bats at what they call an eternity roost tree. For those that are not familiar, these are trees where the pregnant female bats gather together in a warm, safe environment to have their babies. Okay. Biologists found bats with severe bruising and hemorrhaging, as well as severely dehydrated. They found out, just through rumors from the villagers, that homes were being built close by, and that the builders, in an attempt to clear the land of rodents, had taken a first-generation rodenticide, put it into plastic bait bags, and literally stapled them to the base of trees. Biologists went through, when they found out, they went through and they removed every bait bag they could find. Necropsy showed no bait in the stomachs of any of these bats, but what they did see was diphacinone in every liver. That's the first generation rodenticide. It took the biologist a while to figure out how they wound up being poisoned, and then they realized insects were the transmission of the rodenticide. The insects would either walk through the bait or eat the bait, and of course we know bats eat insects. Over 29 days, biologists administered care to 118 affected bats, consisting of 55 adults and 63 pups that were so young they were incapable of flight. At the end of the month, only 3 bats survived to be released. In March of 2019, the National Park Service in Santa Monica was watching one of their mountain lions on a trap cam and noticed something unusual. She appeared to have mange. Alarmed, they captured and sedated her and obtained some skin samples for testing. Sure enough, P53, a 3.5-year-old female, was diagnosed with Notoedric mange. She was treated successfully and released. She was the 5th mountain lion in the Santa Monica group to be diagnosed with mange at that time. Mange is very rare in cats. It's seldom seen in domestic or wild cats. So how did it show up in mountain lions? The decomposed remains of P53 were found a few months after her release. Her official cause of death is unknown, but 4 anticoagulants were identified in her liver. So Notoedric mange is also known as feline scabies. It's what we call an ectoparasite. So it's a mite that lives in the skin and on the hair follicle of the toast. It's very closely related to sarcoptic mange. That's the infamous mange that affects canines, the one that we should all be afraid of. The mites attach to the skin, they mate, and then the females burrow into the skin and they cause this dry, crusty, intensely itchy lesions and hair loss. The skin becomes red and swollen and it begins to thicken. Sores and infections are not uncommon if it's left untreated. Cats will literally self-mutilate to alleviate the itchiness. Mange can actually lead to anorexia, emaciation, and even death. So as we know, it is highly contagious to other animals and of course to humans. But it's usually pretty rare in the United States, except for some isolated pockets. And one of those isolated pockets was Santa Monica. So Notoedric mange is considered an opportunistic parasite. So that means it's usually seen in those that have a compromised immune system. So why would mountain lions have compromised immune systems? The answer actually lies with their smaller brethren, the bobcats. So the National Park Service in Santa Monica, in addition to studying mountain lions, studies bobcats, and they've been doing that for about 20 years now. Fascinating study, it really is. So much like the mountain lion study, the bobs are humanely trapped, they're sedated, given a full exam, and radio collared. They don't give them the GPS collars because they're a little too big. So there have been over 300 bobcats done in this study. And as we all know, bobcats are highly adaptable animals and are very accustomed to living in urban settings. The Santa Monica group had maintained a very high rate of survival over the years. This changed in 2002 when mange entered the picture, and it spread quickly. In just 1 year, 51% of those radio-collared bobs died from mange. Toxicology testing revealed that 98% of them had anticoagulant compounds in their livers. So Dallas's Dr. Laurel series tested 124 apparently healthy bobcats in the Santa Monica area over a 5-year period. This is one of the most extensive and highly regarded studies on bobcats. Blood was drawn for a range of hematologies, including an infectious disease panel. Dr. Series then removed 26 bobcats from the study who came back positive for infectious disease. Of the 98 bobs that were left, 38% were positive from anywhere from 1 to 5 anticoagulant compounds. But it was the CBC, or the complete blood count of the blood test, that held the biggest surprise. It showed an increase in immune response. And for those of you that work in the medical field, what she saw was an increased lymphocyte and neutrophils. So we know about bobcats is that they normally encounter Notoedric mange pretty frequently. This type of mite infects rabbits and squirrels. Both of them comprise the bobcat diet. So what now was leaving the bobs open to infestation and infection? Chronic elevation of the immune system in these tested bobs may have led to immune system exhaustion, a dysfunction leaving the animal open to opportunistic infections. Dr. Series believes there is an associative link between mange and rodenticides. And I just want to show you this picture. This is a before and after picture of P22. He's an 11-year-old male. He is California's most famous mountain lion, having graced the cover of National Geographic when he posed in front of the Hollywood sign. You may have seen that picture. It's pretty famous. He's been nicknamed the cougar who's ready for his close-up. So as you can see, he was fully treated, he healed, and was released back into the wild. The San Joaquin Kit Fox of Bakersfield, California, is an endangered population. Due to this, it is very closely monitored by biologists. In 2014, mange began to decimate the population. By January of 2019, their numbers had declined by 50%. Sarcoptic mange is 100% fatal in kit foxes. So we're going to talk about another rodenticide that you may not be too familiar with, but we see a lot of it here in veterinary medicine, bromethalin. And this is the one that shakes us. Bromethalin was developed in 1985, and it's different from the anticoagulant rodenticides. This is a neurotoxin, and it works in one single feeding. Toxicologists at the ASPCA Poison Control Center state that there's a very small margin of safety with this poison. And what we do know is that cats are much more sensitive to it than dogs. Bromethalin works by damaging the central nervous system. It inhibits enzymatic activities, and it leads to an increase in cerebral spinal fluid, which causes intracranial pressure. This leads to paralysis, convulsions, and death. In 2015, the ASPCA received 2,700 phone calls about domestic pets ingesting this poison. And I'm sure the numbers are much higher. These are just the ones that have actually called the poison control hotline. When higher amounts are ingested, an animal enters into a convulsant form. In this syndrome, prognosis is poor. Symptoms usually begin a few hours after ingestion. They may develop hyperexcitability and muscle tremors. This is followed by hypothermia or increased body temperature, and then seizures. Death is inevitable. When lower amounts are ingested, an animal enters into what they call the paralytic form. Symptoms begin in 1 to 4 days. They usually start with vomiting and appetite loss. Then it follows with instability in the hind end. Nystagmus and anisocoria, which is unequal pupil size, begin. And then there's muscle tremors and paralysis. Treatment must be immediate and aggressive following ingestion of bromethalin. I don't know if any of you have ever been to San Francisco. If you have, you may be familiar with these guys. The free-ranging conures of San Francisco's Telegraph Hill began showing neurologic symptoms. People were finding them down on the ground. They were moving in circles. Some of them were very weak, unable to walk. Some were seizing. 15 conures presented to an animal emergency hospital, and sadly, all of them died. Doctors and technicians noted bruising and bleeding, as well as broken bones. Necropsy showed degeneration of the cerebellar white matter of the brain. Toxicology results revealed bromethalin in every single one of them. So many people think, well, we put out a bait station and only the rats get into it. And it had been a while before anybody thought to actually study this. Urban ecologist Christopher Burke, ran an interesting study on what he called bait station behavior. He placed 2 bait stations armed with non-toxic bait in 90 yards in a residential neighborhood in Southern California. And then he placed a trap camera on the bait stations. They were monitored pretty closely for 30 days, first from December 2017 to August 2018, and then for another 64 days from September 2018 to March 2019. As you can see from this, the study showed that while rats were present at 80% of the bait stations, they weren't the only creatures to visit them. Fox, squirrels, and cats almost tied for second place, followed by opossums, raccoons, native rodents, bobcats, coyotes, and skunks. Burke stated that the fox squirrels were accessing the bait stations by chewing through the top. So the EPA has twice attempted to regulate anticoagulant rodenticides in response to growing concerns. The first time was in 2008 with the final risk mitigation decision for 10 rodenticides, such a lovely title. This required tamper-proof bait stations, made it illegal to use loose bait. And most importantly, it made it illegal for consumers to purchase and use second generation rodenticide. So that meant you couldn't go to Lowe's or Home Depot and just buy second generations. However, they are approved for use by licensed pesticide applicators. As per the EPA, as of January 1st, 2015, all registered consumer use of rodenticide conforms to their risk mitigation decision. So that means that everything that you should find on the market for you to buy and bring home should not contain second generation rodenticide. California Assemblyman Richard Bloom of Santa Monica and Beverly Hills authored the California Ecosystems Protection Act that aims to further regulate the use of second generation rodenticides. So remember, even though we can't go into Lowe's and buy it, licensed pesticide applicators can still use it. So they can use it in your home, they can use it in state parks, wherever they need to. Under Bloom's bill, the use of second generation anticoagulants throughout the state of California would be banned, except for use in agricultural settings, such as slaughterhouses, canneries, wineries, that sort of thing. Medical facilities are exempt from it as well. This bill also bans the use of both first and second generation rodenticide on state-owned property. Governor Newsom signed this into law on September 29th, and it goes into effect on January 1st. It would be interesting to see how this plays out. So, integrated pest management, or IPM, is believed to be the most ecologically safe way to manage pest control. The EPA defines IPM as an environmentally sensitive approach that relies on a combination of common sense practices. At the core is the understanding of how rodents interact with their environment. We know that rodents, especially rats, are highly intelligent and highly adaptable, but they're also critical to the ecosystem. They are seed dispersers from plants and trees. We don't tend to think about that. And they're also providing food for other animals. The EPA and the World Health Organization recommend exclusion and sanitation tactics in rodent control. The bottom line is not to make your home welcoming to rodents and don't give them easy access in. So as you can see, seal your entry ports, secure your trash bins. That's going to keep raccoons out of there as well. Repair leaky pipes, get bushes and tree limbs, cut that back from the house, that sort of thing. But one of the most effective ways to control rodents is to welcome predators to your property. So each of these North Texas natives eats rats and mice. Though raccoons are not your most reliable for rodent control, they will catch and eat small rodents. And opossums, of course, have that wonderful added benefit of eating ticks. And the snake that you see pictured is the non-venomous Texas rat snake. They can be your closest ally. While it may not be ideal for everybody to have all of these predators in your backyard, then you may just have to go with the world's top rodent predator. Owls, like mountain lions, are apex predators, right? We don't think of birds as being apex predators. They sit at the top of the food chain. Like rodents, they are nocturnal, meaning they're active at night. So an owl hunts by both sight and hearing. They can see 8 times as far as a human being. Their vision is so fine-tuned that they can spot a rabbit in a field 2 miles away. An owl's hearing is a complete work of art. They can tell which direction a sound is coming from by the time difference in which the sound reaches each ear. So that's why an owl turns its head. When the sound reaches both ears simultaneously, they know the prey is directly in front of them. Barn owls are a homeowner's best friend. Rodents are high up on their menu. They eat an average of 3 to 4 mice per day, or 79 pounds of mice each year. With an average lifespan of 10 years, that's approximately 13,000 mice per owl per lifetime. Barn owls are the least territorial of all owls, and they're also the most social, so they will happily share your property with other raptors and even other owls. So while you have your night mousing taken care of, you have hawks for day hunting. And I know it tends to scare people when you get hawks into the backyard, especially if you've got bird feeders out and, because hawks will eat other birds. Hawks hunt by binocular vision, so they can locate prey 1 mile away. They not only see in color, but in the ultraviolet range. Hawks can see something called a feces trail, and this is kind of funny, but it's kind of cool at the same time. After a mouse defecates, hawks see a neon trail that leads directly back to the mouse. But hawks consume about 1 to 2 rodents daily. Small mammals are their #1 dietary choice. So these are some wise words from Dr. Series. The most important part of this, I thought, or the one that hits home the most, is absence of data regarding how some compounds affect wildlife does not mean it poses no risk to wildlife. And this is just a remembrance of some of the Santa Monica mountain lions who have lost their lives to rodenticide. There have been more, but not all of them had photographs. So hopefully we have a better understanding of the impact we're having on wildlife. And sometimes it's to their detriment. Part of my job isn't just to help heal animals, it's to also be their voice. I need to be able to speak for them, whether it's domestic or wild. Harm to wildlife isn't just happening in faraway places. As we saw today, it's literally happening in our own backyards, and I believe we can do a lot better. I'd like to thank Rita and Mike Hatch and all of you at the Elm Fork Master Naturalists. It's been an honor to present to you. I'd also like to thank my employer at MedVet for caring enough about this topic to want to help spread the word and allowing me to use their equipment and their conference room. So thank you so much.
Wow, thank you, Tracy. That was impactful. Oh, wow. Do we have any questions? We appreciate you speaking to us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Very enlightening. Anything that deters mice from getting in your car?
Well, that's a good question. I would say to try not to, if you're able to try not to park it near any shrubbery or bushes, because it's usually where you're going to find the mice or the rats. That's really kind of a hard one. That would be my first thing, is to do that and try to keep it, not to be accessible.
Somebody had one get in the car in the garage.
Oh, in the garage, yeah. The whole thing comes down to how are they getting into the garage? And a lot of times with a garage door, one thing to look at is to make sure it's coming down flush with the ground. The problem becomes access. They're finding it inviting because they're able to get in somehow. So, it's going to take a matter of looking for little cracks. They can fit through the smallest cracks. So caulking up some cracks, plugging up some holes, checking that garage door, because I've had that happen as well over time. They start to warp with the weather and that sort of thing. Sometimes getting that rubber extension on the bottom can help as well.
Someone asked, do essential oils work?
No.
Who are the major users of rodenticide? And what about termites prevention?
I have not looked into termite prevention. That is something that was a little bit out of the scope of what I was studying, but that is an interesting point that is worth looking into. As far as who's using rodenticide, homeowners, because you can go to Lowe's and what you're buying, or even Kroger, Anything that you buy off the shelf now, any kind of rodenticide contains bromethalin. That's the neurotoxin. That's the one where, unfortunately, somebody in veterinary medicine, if your fur baby gets a hold of it, there's not a tremendous amount we can do. We can only do so much. But homeowners are using it. Apartment complexes, when they come through, sometimes they'll put down bait traps. You may see the big bait traps outside. Businesses use them. Hospitals use them. They're in a lot of areas now.
Mm-hmm.
So those big bait traps do contain, by law, they're allowed to contain bromethalin, a second generation rodenticide, and or a first generation rodenticide. The EPA has allowed that.
Someone said that they put mothballs. Is that a problem?
From what I understand, and I would need to look more into it, I had come across that in going through these studies that apparently when the mothballs break down, there's something there that can be harmful to some of the animals. I know when I was growing up, that's what my mother would use in her garden to keep cats, the neighborhood cats, out from digging and using it as a litter box. So we all grew up with that. But I would need to look more into it. From what I understand, as it breaks down, there's something that's not necessarily toxic to animals, but just not really healthy for them. Whether or not, for example, for cats and stuff, some people use cayenne pepper or something like that, because if the cats get it on their paws or they sniff it, they're going to back off it, right? Because we certainly don't want cats using our flower beds for litter boxes. Whether or not that's going to work for rats, that hasn't been studied. I've never tried that, to be honest.
Okay. Alex wanted to know if you've presented this to city parks and rec departments in the area.
I have not. The first presentation I did was back in the beginning of March for North Texas Master Naturalists, and literally the next week Dallas shut down because of COVID. So this is my first time starting to get back out with it again, and no, I have not presented. I have had contact over the last year or so with different members of Texas Parks and Wildlife, trying to see if any studies on rodenticide in wildlife have been done here in Texas. Sadly, they have not. But the overwhelming response I got from individual people with Parks and Wildlife is, we'd love to see those studies here. They were very interested in it. We know it probably is impacting our own wildlife, but we'd like to see the numbers. Unfortunately, these studies are very expensive to fund. Santa Monica, obviously, has the money to get this done. UC Davis. In New York, Cornell University, which is our #1 veterinary university in the country, they were doing some studies on raptors throughout New York State. They ran out of funding, so it's been a few years since they've been able to continue it. They learned a tremendous amount, but as we know, funding dries up. So.
And somebody commented that wineries in California were erecting barn owl boxes to encourage them.
Right. When I was in school, just a little side note story, I was working in retail, because it's got the most flexible hours. And I was a manager at Costco at the time. And one of the things that Costco did that I really thought was ingenious, and I've never tried it at the home level, is they didn't have the bait boxes. They had statues of owls that they put around in the building and on the outside. And, I worked there for a few years, and I never remember seeing a mouse or a rat. And I always thought that was very interesting, so something else to keep in mind. I know in Northwestern Europe, there are some places where you can actually go, I'm going to say into the feed store, but you can actually purchase wolf urine. I don't know if you can purchase that here in the United States, but you can purchase coyote urine. You can sprinkle that down as well. That's a natural predator to a rat and, a lot of other animals. So if, that's not a bad idea to sprinkle that down. I'm not quite sure how that smells, for us, but
coyote or fox or something urine would be.
Right. Which I thought that was interesting. And I know people have used, for example, up in their attic, they've placed Irish Spring soap because let's face it, that's kind of on the strong side. And, that helped them with getting squirrels out of the attic.
Oh, yeah.
They don't want to live with that scent. So,
Yeah. Caitlin wanted to know if you have any advice on anything we could do to assist on the legislation side to aid in preventing the sale of these dangerous chemicals.
You know, it was a long, hard battle to get rodenticides taken off the shelf. Next is going to be bromethalin. And, you know, there's not a lot of studies on bromethalin. And I think that's where we need to start. The problem is, and California ran into it as well with the Ecosystems Protection Act. And I don't mean this as a slur in any way, but the pest control industry fought that quite hard. You know, obviously the pest control industry does, I'm not putting them down. They do keep us safe and their job is to keep us healthy as well. I mean, I love rats as pets. I don't have one, but they are very intelligent and affectionate and playful. I don't know if I want them living in my cabinets though. And some of them do carry diseases. So it takes a lot of money to get that going. But in my opinion, research and education need to come first. And the more we can talk to people about this and show them the studies from California, unfortunately, we don't have any local studies. I would love to see that start. And if there were local studies, I'd love to be a part of it. But I would think research and education. We've got to get people talking about it. If you remember, the beginning of 2020, it seemed like centuries ago at this point, but when Eagle 14 sadly passed away, I'm sure a lot of you remember that. I mean, people saw it on Facebook. They were watching the Eagle Cam. It was all over national news. It was quite sad. But people started talking about it, which is good. Let's get people talking about it. Now I'm starting to see more people talk about the mountain lions. So that's good. Let's get people talking about it and see what we can do. One of the things that I did not cover in depth is Dr. Siri's study is amazing. Part of her study was they actually cracked the genome for the Bobcats. And what they learned is that the rodenticides have altered their genes. I mean, it's horrifying. And, you know, if you look at what's happening to wildlife, altering their genes and the poisoning, what is it doing to us? What is it doing to our children? You know, it's something to think about because, you know, we handle these chemicals. What kind of danger are we in as well? So it's, so Dr. Siri's study, I only covered a small portion of it, you know, for time constraints, but there's so much information in there. And when I said that it was well respected, you know, if you're able to look it up online, you can find the study and you can read it for free. It's really worth it. You know, there's a lot of good information in that, and it's going to be quite surprising.
A lot of people would like your contact information to see if you would like to speak to other organizations.
Oh, I would love that. Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
Rita has my email address. I don't mind if you post it. I'm not able to get into chat at the moment.
Someone asked, do professional exterminators still police bait boxes to pick up dead rats?
No, they don't. Because when they come out, if they're, you know, I mean, think about it, they come out of the bait boxes. And remember, mostly what they're eating now is bromethalin, the neurotoxin. They're staggering. They've got the high level dose. They only have a few hours to live. And if they're not able to get under protection, who's going to see them first? A hawk or an eagle or some sort of raptor. So usually they get them first, but pest control agents do not. Yeah. Come and police them. And, you know, I've talked to some homeowners that think that these mice or rats die in the box. And like, oh, no, they don't. They eat and then they go. So we have no idea who's going to come in contact with them, but usually it's going to be a predator first.
Okay, I think, any other questions? I think I got them. So, thank you very much for speaking to us, and hopefully we will be able to spread the word. So
I hope so. I hope so. This is something that I've become very passionate about. And, you know, here in emergency, not a week goes by that I don't see at least 2 bromethalin ingestions now. It's, you know, yeah. And it's just people don't know how dangerous it is.
Yeah.
So, but thank you so much for having me today. I've enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.